This is a picture of the Copan Valley in Honduras, and the archaeological site is in the center of the picture where the grove of trees is located, many of those trees growing on the top of the structures that are at the archaeological site. Copan is located in the lower right side of the picture here. It's in the northwestern side there, or western side of Honduras, near the Guatemala border. It's known for its sculpture, and as you see on the left-hand side, that's from Copan, where there are tassels and fringe. The picture on the right is not Copan, but it's a Maya, from a Maya site, and there's texture in the fabrics that are there, but we don't really know what they're representing. And likewise on polychrome vessels, there are pictures of people dressed. Again, we can only guess what these fabrics are. I'd go for tree bark cloth. And there are also pictures on polychrome vessels of fabrics that are not stiff and opaque, that are transparent. And in fact, there's an article that will be coming in the next issue of Dress by Cara Tremaine on sheer fabrics on a man, not a woman. But we'd like to know more. And Copan is a source of information for more, because there are a lot of textile fragments from temples and tombs in Copan. And so this is where I entered the picture. The textiles had not been analyzed. Everything else from one of the first tombs had been analyzed. So Cameron McNeil got me to go to Copan in 2006 for a month with Renee Walker, a graduate student at URI, and then went back in 2011 for 3 months with Martha Grimm and her husband Dee, who speaks Spanish and was invaluable also. We did micro and macro photography, and I analyzed the textiles. And so this is part of the report. The most sacred part of the archaeological site is this area that is called the Acropolis, and that they built a platform and a temple starting in 427 AD. So that's that time frame. And then the next king would come along and tear down all or part of that temple and build another one. So over the years, because there were 16 rulers, over the years, the platforms would just get higher and higher and higher. And so this whole Acropolis area is higher than the ground around it. And the structure that we're interested in is that is the one that tombs and temples have been investigated, is the structure 16. And this is structure 16, and the textiles I'm going to be talking about all came from within or below that structure. The Copan River that ran through the middle of that valley had inundated the backside of structure 16 at one point, and that has been shored up, as you can see. So it's really tall from the backside. It looks taller from the backside than from the front side. And I got to go to the first tomb I'm going to talk about twice. And we entered through this lower door on the right-hand side before we went even lower. And inside there was a platform with a temple built on it that the archaeologist named Margarita. And inside or underneath that, where that temple had been, because it had been removed for the next platform to be built. But they left a passageway for this vault that you see here. It had 2 chambers. A woman who was 50 to 60 years old, high-ranking, maybe the wife of the first ruler, was on the bottom platform and down here, and there were grave goods around her. And then and up here there's an offertory platform that had jade and shells and baskets and textiles. One of the vessels is this one called the Dazzler. It had a lid, and on its lid there were layers of textiles. In fact, on the offertory platform, there were layers of textiles, sometimes as many as 25 different layers, each textile being different, because the priest could get back into that area through that passageway. This is one of the layers of textiles, and you can't always tell exactly what they are, except that lo and behold, on this one, I found that and recognized it for being the edge of a textile. And for those who don't understand textiles, not this audience, but a previous one, I made up a facsimile of a woven edge of a woven fabric. So that's what we're seeing is actually this would be warp yarns, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And these are the weft yarns, the big ones are the weft yarns. Then if you remove a weft yarn, it just leaves a big gaping hole. But you know that there was a yarn there, at least as big as the hole, maybe bigger if it collapses some. And so that's what we're seeing here. And in fact, this adds up to 30 yarns per centimeter, which is, for those of us who don't think centimeters, it's 84 yarns per inch. And the larger yarns that are missing were 0.2 millimeter in diameter. But this little warp yarn that's still there was 0.08 millimeters. So it's a very small yarn in comparison. And that's the type of fabric that might be woven on a backstrap loom. If you warp the loom and with the warp yarns and then weave in large weft yarns, it moves faster than if you weave in small yarns. But it did find a lot of balanced weaves, which just takes more time to weave. That's not from Copan. This is an example of an interesting fabric to share with you. And this is what it looks like closer up. And lo and behold, this was not real common. Oftentimes everything's just brown or covered with cinnabar, the red mineral, the mercury mineral that they painted many things with. This one, the warp and weft, are 2 different colors. I ran an indigo test on it, but didn't get any results. So don't know why the one in the horizontal elements here are dark. But this is another close-up. So you can see this is not something like you can just run under the microscope to see what fiber content it is, because it's so mineralized. And the light-colored, what I'm going to be calling, I'm not going to call, light-colored yarns are a 2-ply yarn. And I'll show you. This is a scanning electron microscope, and toward the bottom down here, you can see where that S-ply is evident. And at the top is that is the yarn that was running horizontally. And if we look at it closer, it's cotton, and you can tell that it's cotton. Here's a good convolution. It's very degraded, but still intact enough that you can tell that it's a cotton fiber. So in that direction, it was cotton. The other direction was the plant material, unidentified at this point. Another interesting thing that was found, this is the archaeologist's picture here of something they found that had a lot of cinnabar on it, and jade ornaments. They removed the jade ornaments and were able to extract it, and this is what they found. They called it a mat. I call it a hat. This being the brim of, this is the brim of the hat on the right-hand side, and the crown of the hat here on the left-hand side, and it's twined. And the weft twining here in the brim, this is weft twining, and this is warp twining here on that. And there are little pieces of a covering that had once covered this, because this wouldn't be very rainproof as it is. So there was a covering on it that intrigued me because it's layered, and I didn't know what that was. So I took some back to the University of Rhode Island and did some SEM work, and this is what the cellular structure looks like for that covering that was on the hat. And down here on the bottom right, there's a row of little funny looking oval circles that are stoma. They are stoma, which are like vents for a leaf or a stem. And then I was able to match that up with sedge grass. And you can see in the middle right-hand picture, there's stoma there. It's there in the other pictures too, just not as easy to see. And you can see that the cell linkages are similar to the covering on the hat. So some variety of sedge grass was probably what covered that hat. And so there are things that I can't explain quite so well. And this is an example. This is something that Martha and I found among the fragments that had been preserved. And there are 4 yarns missing, as you can see. The bottom is just a close-up of you made that one or another one that was like it. And you can see the yarns that are extant. And that's what it looks like if you see it from the beginning, from the top side. So you can here see how those yarns weave in and out. And so it is just a little bit more than half of a centimeter wide. So what is this? Could you have a really narrow trim? But it can get more narrow. We found groups of 3 instead of 4. We found groups of 2 instead of 3 or 4. So, and it was very brittle. I mean, you could almost look at it and it would shatter. And so some of these that might have been wider at one point than what we see here. So the jury's out on what that is, but it's interesting. And we found a number of little things that look like this that we had no idea whatsoever. That's the yarn structure. Okay, back to another site then, still in structure 16, and there was a temple that has been destroyed, but there was a tomb under it, and this temple was called Orapindula, and what we're looking down into a portion of the tomb. There's this much on the picture on the left-hand side. There's that much more on the further left of that. But this was not elaborate like the Margarita tomb was. But this is also an early ruler, late 5th century, and it was for a man. And then there were grave offerings also with him, shells and vessels and textiles that were probably his clothing and shroud, and then coverings for some of the vessels, or food maybe wrapped in a textile and placed in his tomb. And there were not anywhere near the amount of textiles that we found in the Margarita tomb, but there were interesting textiles. Like Margarita, sometimes some of the textiles had a lot of variety as far as diameter of the yarns, and that, of course, is being hand spun. Found, like in Margarita, Z spun as well as S spun. Sometimes Z in one direction, S in the other, sometimes both directions S, but Z by, and this is cotton, so that's the predominant direction for spinning the yarns. Plain weaves predominated, as you can see, although that's layered, so it's hard to see. It takes a lot of study. Then this is a twill weave, and this is a 2-1 twill, and the yarns are 1/10 millimeter. They're really tiny yarns. In fact, all the markings are millimeter markings in these pictures, and so this is a very small yarn. And this fabric would have had 40 yarns per centimeter in if it's a warp twill in the warp direction, and that would be equal to 100 yarns per inch. So it was quite a fine fabric. And it was surprising sometimes in all the little fragments of materials that had been saved, then something might peek out like a turtle. And this is actually twining, as you can see in the close-up right here. In that. And then this is bark cloth, and I'll show you another picture of bark cloth. There are longitudinal openings in it that classify this as a fragment of bark cloth. And here's our sedge again. Okay, one more group of textiles as we look at this layered sedge. And we're back in structure 16, except surprise, surprise, and they were very surprised. There is a temple intact inside structure 16. Now, the tombs we're talking about are underneath here to directly and to the left, where there was room for another temple over there at one point. And so this temple has been named Rosalia, and it was built in the late 6th century for the temple. And it's the most intact Maya temple of all Maya sites. It's not that brightly colored now, but it's still colored. And they built a replica of it in the sculpture museum that's there at the site. And so people can walk in and see what it was like to be in there, pretend one's a priest. And inside at this first level, there's a big room, and there are passageways that they had painted the walls white in the late 6th century. This is the replica. And in the floor of one of these passageways, the first main passageway, there was a niche in the floor, and they placed a sacred bundle in that niche, because then they filled the whole temple with mud and pebbles. And as archaeologists were clearing it out, they found this niche, and it contained 9, this is just 6 of them, 9 chert objects that they're called eccentrics, and they had textiles on them. And this is what an eccentric looks like, and they're really thin. And there were also bifaces. This is the largest of them. It's really big. This is 35 centimeters in length. And it also is very thin. This is the greatest collection of eccentrics in the Maya world. And Ricardo Garcia just published a book about those eccentrics, and they're guarded, they're locked up tight, and you don't view them or photograph them without being watched. And so I got to see them, but I really put this in here for you to see the size of the eccentrics. That this is easier to understand how big they are, and you can see blue textile on that one, and there's the blue textile right there. This is probably the brown material on top is probably bark cloth, part of the bark cloth that they were also wrapped in. So they were wrapped individually, and sometimes there were several layers. They were wrapped as several layers, or maybe wrapped individually and then the bundle of those wrapped. And as you can see the fibers there, and the yarn structure as well as the fabric structure. A good number of these, the fabric count was 10 by 10 yarns per centimeter. So that was interesting that so many of the fabrics were that, even though the yarns might be different sizes. And this is azurite. The blue is not a dye. It's a pigment that's been painted on the textiles by the priest. This is bark cloth, remnants of layers of bark cloth that were wrapped generally on top of the other fabric. But the most interesting of the fabrics was this strange fabric that it also is a 10 by 10 yarns per centimeter, but big yarns, it's like 0.6 millimeter yarns, and just pure white, even today, just as white as they can be. And the interstices between the yarns are filled in with mud. This is maybe, none of this fabric was found on the bifaces or the eccentrics, but it was, the archaeologists found it at the site and they collected it all. I think this is probably the cover that went around the whole bundle, and that's why it's not found associated with the individual objects that came from that niche. And under SEM, those fibers are not cotton, although others have reported white cotton fabrics around sacred objects. This is some kind of bast or leaf fiber. And I'm not a botanist, and so, and I don't know if someone can tell exactly what this would be from the SEM, but I have a number of these. But you can see the cross markings in the fibers, so that's why I'm saying bast or leaf, very stiff. And so this is a brief summary of our findings. We found cotton, we found a variety of plant materials, leaves, stems, grass, the inner tree bark. Yarns were, the single simple yarns were S and Z spun. We found 2-ply yarns that were S twist, probably, but not necessarily meaning S spun, because there was some S spun, S twist. Diameters ranged from very small to 0.08 to 2 millimeters, but there were a lot that were just like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 millimeters. Plain weave fabrics, balanced and unbalanced. A few examples of twill and twining, not a lot. We found the cross-layered bark cloth and sedge, And when I was doing SEM, I did some EDS analysis of those red deposits of mercury, and some of the red deposits were iron. Some of the black deposits were iron also, and green crystals were malachite, blue azurite, and then when I did the soil, of course, is aluminum and other minerals elements. This is my acknowledgments to Cameron McNeil, who got me into this to begin with in 2006. The archaeologist whose teams excavated the 3 sites that I reported to you today. The people that went with me and helped me, Renee, Martha, and Dee, and I got a grant from FAMC for the 2006 work and 2 grants from the University of Rhode Island. And here's my bibliography that you could photograph if you are interested.